Hi everyone, welcome back to Novel Nomad and welcome to another Top 5 Wednesday. The topic of this week is books that you'd think you would hate but ended up loving. And this is a really hard one because I'm quite open to most reads. I've read quite diversely, but I've picked a bit of a funny eclectic mix because usually it's books that you'd think you'd hate but you end up loving. It's a common one that surprises you. So it's kind of hard to go into books that you had to try and remember what your preconceptions were of the book beforehand. So first off, I'm starting with books that were hugely hyped, and I was worried that I wouldn't quite get what everyone else was talking about. And the first off is Sophie Laguna's The Eye of the Sheep. I actually had no idea about this book before I went into it, and even understanding all the hype, I really didn't look into this book because it didn't appeal to me. I don't think it really appealed. The idea at the time, I wasn't really reading many of the books. This won, I think, the Stella Prize? Oh, Miles Franklin Award, apologies. So this won the Miles Franklin, and I haven't read many books from the Miles Franklin Award, which is an Australian literary prize. So when I started this book, I was very, very worried that it was going to be overhyped. It was going to be too much. I wasn't really going to understand. But I loved it. I love this book. The quality of the writing is stunning. I can see why it won the prize. And also it's got a very heartfelt character. So the main character, Jimmy, he has to go through quite a lot. He does have autism, or he's at least on the spectrum. It's during the 80s and he has to see quite a lot of damage within his family, domestic violence, different things like that. And you see it through his eyes, and many of the times he can't comprehend what is going on. So there's a lot of compassion that the author deals out for the characters. So this was absolutely amazing, and I highly recommend. You know, sometimes you can get scared by the hype, but definitely give books a try that are hugely hyped. Next was one, is because it was in a series, and the first book in the series I was completely underwhelmed by. One of those hyped books that you do get underwhelmed by. So that is, of course, Stephanie Perkins' Anna and the French Kiss. But I was very reluctant to read the second one. Usually not many people like the second one. They prefer Anna and the French Kiss. But I loved Lola and the Boy Next Door. It was, I don't know, it spoke to me a lot more, and I liked the character development. Lola is incredibly self-centered. She does a lot of things for herself, and she really doesn't know the direction she's going, and it's really hard for her to really find that stability in her life. And that was really interesting to actually have a young girl who is going through those later stages of being a teenager, who is trying to find who she is and the direction she wants to go, and not being hemmed in by different expectations society has for her. So I really thoroughly enjoyed Lola. I think it gave a very different feel to the other one. The other one was a classic teen romance. This one was a bit more independent, and the guy was such a sweetheart. I always love when you have really sweet and lovely romantic interests. Next is based on a previous series that I have attempted to read, and that is Mark Lawrence's Prince of Fools. I attempted to read his first series, Prince of Thorns, and that was incredibly dark, very dark fantasy, and I wasn't used to it at the time that I was reading it, so I could not approach it. So I thought I was going to absolutely hate this one. I had no idea why. I picked it up until I read the first page. And that was absolutely brilliantly hilarious, and I couldn't help it. I had to keep going. And I think what sold me on this one is, yes, it's dark fantasy, but it's dark fantasy with that horribly dark humour, which I just love. I think it's so well placed within the setting, and so I really loved this book. It was so much fun, and I recommend it to so many people at my work, because who doesn't love a bit of dark, you know, epic fantasy with a really hilarious, womanizing, cowardly main character? It's great. Next is probably no surprise because most people don't like this book, but I went into The Heart of Darkness fearing for my sanity because I studied at university and I had to do a project on it. So you really have to read it, analyze it, and understand it. And I was quite surprised that I also enjoyed it. Most people do not enjoy The Heart of Darkness. I think the concept of the story is very hard to grasp. but it is really focusing on a really intense mental battle and colonial battle that was happening at the time. It's really questioning colonization and the effectiveness of it, and trying to break down that kind of imperial power that Britain had, and any colonial countries had. They all had this belief that they were right, they were superior, they were better than people who were living in the countries that they started occupying. So it was really fascinating how it was dealing with that, but with a white male cast. So I thought this was absolutely brilliant. It's questioning Western values and Western superiority. And it was doing that in the late 1890s, which is huge because empire was still quite strong at the time. It wasn't in its peak, it was starting to get into decline. But the idea of a certain kind of genetic superiority was going to be huge in the early 1900s, and that was basically, oh, it still hasn't been killed off in a way really, but it was huge throughout the 1900s. So to have this questioning of that, you know, ethnic superiority was huge, and I loved it because it was so progressive. Alright, one surprise one, and the last one for this list is The Princess Bride. Sorry, this is a tiny, tiny little book, but it's so good. Look at that cover. Look at that detail. I think this is a, it was printed in the US. Let me see. Oh, there's the full cover. It even has a map. I have to find when it was printed. It's in such good condition. I found it secondhand. And so, this edition was published in 1977. And I loved this movie. It took me a while to get into the movie actually, and I really, really thoroughly loved Lord of the Rings. So to kind of get into this fantasy movie that was taking the mick out of all those old fantasies that I really hadn't been exposed to for the first watching, I was so worried that the book wouldn't be able to hold up to the movie. I was worried I was going to hate it, and it would like cast like this horrible shadow over my love of the movie. But I think what really managed to sell me on this book was the fact that the same guy who wrote the screenplay wrote the book, and it's literally word for word. It has a different ending, and I like the ending. I think it's quite good. It sits in a more realistic perspective, but of course the movie you want to have a bit more of a whimsy ending. But this was so much fun. It's basically like watching the movie again in slow-mo with all the extra details that you missed the first time round, and of course it's playing in your head. So it's just brilliant. If you've seen the movie but never read the book Princess Bride, just do it. It's absolutely freaking fantastic. Alright, so thank you for joining me for my last Top 5 Wednesday of March. Hopefully I'll get some exciting ones for April coming up. But if you want to read any of these books, or just chat to me about any books that you thought you would hate at least and ended up loving, let me know down below. Okay, so I'll see you next time. Happy reading. Bye!